The deep space diplomatic shuttle hummed with a nervous energy that even the most advanced noise-canceling systems couldn't suppress. Ambassador Emily Rodriguez adjusted her formal attire, a carefully designed suit that blended cutting-edge adaptive camouflage technology with traditional diplomatic elegance. Each thread was a marvel of human engineering, capable of micro-adjustments to color, texture, and thermal signature based on the surrounding environment. Her eyes traced the holographic displays surrounding her, a constellation of data points and diplomatic briefings that told the story of humanity's most challenging interstellar negotiation. The Zornak Empire wasn't just another galactic power. They were a civilization that had systematically absorbed or crushed countless species over millennia of expansion. Humanity was the latest potential target, a young species that had only recently developed faster-than-light travel capabilities. Emily remembered her training. 5 years of intensive preparation at the Global Diplomatic Coordination Center in New Santiago had led her to this moment. She wasn't a typical diplomat. Her background was a carefully curated blend of psychological warfare expertise, xenocultural studies, and practical conflict resolution. The selection committee had spent months analyzing hundreds of candidates, ultimately choosing her for reasons that went far beyond traditional diplomatic credentials. Her personal history was anything but conventional. A former mixed martial arts champion turned anthropological researcher, Emily had spent years studying conflict resolution across human cultures. Her doctoral thesis on nonverbal communication had revolutionized diplomatic training, introducing concepts that challenged centuries of traditional negotiation strategies. The Zornak would be her ultimate test, a civilization so alien that most human analysts considered meaningful communication almost impossible. The shuttle's quantum communication system pinged softly. Another update from the Earth Diplomatic Corps scrolled across her neural interface, a direct neural link that allowed instantaneous information processing. The latest intelligence reports were troubling. Satellite observations and deep space probes had revealed increasing Zornak military movements near human-controlled star systems. This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting. It was a potential prevention of all-out war. Outside the shuttle's reinforced windows, the vastness of space stretched impossibly wide. Distant star clusters glimmered like scattered diamonds, each one a potential battlefield or diplomatic challenge. Humanity had learned quickly that the universe was far more complex than any historical models had predicted. The old conflicts of Earth, national boundaries, ideological differences, seemed laughably small compared to the intricate political landscape of interstellar civilization. A soft chime indicated they were approaching the primary diplomatic platform. Constructed in the neutral zone between known territories, the massive station was a marvel of engineering. Multiple gravitational zones, adaptive environmental systems, and communication arrays that could process languages from hundreds of different species made it the most advanced diplomatic center in known space. Emily's neural interface began to translate the incoming communication signals. The Zornak language was less a spoken form of communication and more a complex quantum entanglement of neural patterns. Traditional translation systems would fail spectacularly, but her custom-designed linguistic processor, developed by a team of human linguists, quantum physicists, and artificial intelligence specialists, could parse the intricate communication patterns. The first visual contact came into view. The Zornak diplomatic vessel was nothing like human ship designs. It resembled a massive crystalline organism more than a mechanical construct, its surface shifting and transforming with what seemed like living intelligence. Fractal patterns moved across its exterior, each movement a complex language of its own. Navigation seemed almost organic, with the ship responding to environmental stimuli in ways that defied traditional understanding of space travel. Emily took a deep breath. Her briefing files were extensive. Thousands of pages of analysis, cultural studies, and potential negotiation scenarios. But she knew, deep down, that no amount of preparation could fully predict the complexity of this encounter. Humanity stood at a crossroads. This meeting would determine whether they would become another conquered civilization or prove themselves as something entirely unexpected. The neural interface displayed her psychological readiness metrics: heart rate, stable; cortisol levels, optimal; cognitive processing, enhanced. Everything about her preparation screamed calculated precision. But there was something else, a spark of unpredictability that no algorithm could fully measure, something quintessentially human. As the shuttle began its docking procedure, Emily Rodriguez allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The Zornak were about to learn that humanity was not just another species to be cataloged and conquered. The Chamber of Imperial Assembly was an architectural marvel that defied human comprehension. Gravitational fields manipulated at the molecular level created impossible geometric shapes that shifted and breathed like living organisms. Crystal-based communication nodes pulsed with electromagnetic rhythms, each pulse a complex language of its own. Emperor Krozek's dominated the central platform, a being that was less an individual and more a collective consciousness embodied in a singular form. His body was a marvel of biological engineering that would make human geneticists weep with both terror and fascination. Crystalline structures interwoven with neural networks created a living being that was part organic, part technological marvel. Tendrils of quantum-entangled consciousness extended beyond his physical form, touching the minds of those around him with barely perceptible mental probes. Emily Rodriguez stood perfectly still, her neural interface working overtime to process the complex communication patterns. The Zornak didn't just speak. They communicated through a multi-dimensional language that simultaneously transmitted emotional states, historical context, and quantum-level information. Each word was a universe of meaning, each gesture a complex political statement. The Emperor began his ritual of intimidation, a performance that had broken the spirit of countless civilizations over millennia of galactic conquest. His voice was not a sound in the traditional sense, but a multi-frequency transmission that bypassed auditory systems and directly stimulated cognitive processing centers. Human translators would have collapsed under the complexity of the communication. "We are the architects of civilization," Krozek began, his consciousness rippling through the chamber. "Civilizations rise and fall like quantum fluctuations, but the Zornak Empire remains constant. We have absorbed 3,742 distinct species into our collective consciousness. Each civilization thought itself unique. Each believed it could resist our progression." Holographic displays materialized around the chamber, showing the violent history of Zornak expansion. Entire planetary systems reduced to quantum data streams, civilizations compressed into collective memory banks. The images were brutal in their clinical precision. No emotion, just pure systematic conquest. Emily's neural interface worked frantically to maintain her psychological equilibrium. The displays were designed to induce a sense of hopelessness, to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Most species would have already broken under the psychological warfare, but humanity was different. Her training kicked in. Years of psychological conditioning, of studying alien communication techniques, of understanding the deep psychological mechanisms of power and submission. She recognized this for what it was, a carefully constructed narrative of inevitable domination. Krozek continued, his consciousness spreading through the chamber like a living network. "Your species is young, barely a flicker in the vast computational matrix of galactic civilization. You have discovered faster than light travel mere decades ago. Your technological achievements are primitive, your biological capabilities limited." The Emperor's form began to shift, demonstrating the technological superiority he spoke about. Microscopic nanite structures reorganized his physical form, creating impossible geometries that defied human understanding of biological limitations. Each transformation was a statement, a demonstration of evolutionary superiority. Emily's neural interface captured every detail. While others might see a display of power, she saw something else: complexity that masked fundamental weaknesses. The very act of constant transformation suggested an underlying insecurity. A truly confident civilization wouldn't need such constant demonstrations of power. We have absorbed civilizations that believe themselves technologically advanced. Krozek's continued. Races that developed quantum computing millennia before your species discovered electricity. Civilizations with biological capabilities that would seem like magic to your limited understanding. The holographic displays shifted, showing a rapid succession of conquered species, each civilization more advanced than the previous, each ultimately absorbed into the Zornak collective. The message was clear. Resistance was not just futile, it was mathematically impossible. But Emily Rodriguez saw something different. Each conquered civilization had approached the Zornak using the same strategy. Technological resistance, direct confrontation, attempts to match the Empire's computational capabilities. Humanity would be different. Her neural interface captured the Emperor's communication patterns. Not just the words, but the underlying quantum frequencies, the emotional subtext, the historical context. She was collecting something far more valuable than diplomatic information. She was gathering a comprehensive psychological profile. As Krozek's monologue continued, filling the chamber with a suffocating narrative of inevitable conquest, Emily allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The Zornak believed they understood every possible form of resistance. They were about to be proven catastrophically wrong. Time seemed to fracture in the moment Emily Rodriguez's hand moved. Her neural interface captured every microsecond with terrifying precision, a complex dance of human spontaneity and calculated decision-making that would be studied by xenopsychologists for generations. The chamber's quantum-sensitive environment registered the movement before most observers could comprehend it. Microscopic sensors designed to track the most minute particle interactions suddenly went into overdrive. Something fundamental was about to change. Emperor Krozek's monologue had reached a crescendo of psychological manipulation. His consciousness stretched across the chamber, tendrils of quantum-entangled communication weaving through the minds of every being present. He spoke of absolute domination, of civilizations crushed beneath the weight of Zornak's superiority, each word a carefully constructed weapon designed to break spiritual resistance. Emily's hand moved with a precision born of years of martial arts training and diplomatic preparation. Her muscles remembered thousands of hours of practice, not just physical movement, but the psychology of human confrontation. A slap was never just a physical action. It was a communication beyond words, a reset button for toxic interactions, a challenge to honor that transcended spoken language. CRA kick. The sound echoed through the chamber like a quantum shockwave. Her open palm struck the Emperor's primary sensory cluster with surgical accuracy. The point of contact was no accident. It was a calculated strike at the most psychologically vulnerable point of the Zornak neural network. Years of psychological study had prepared her for this moment. Time seemed to stop. The Imperial Guards froze, their advanced neural processing systems struggling to comprehend the unprecedented scenario. Their programming had no protocols for a human diplomat physically striking the supreme leader of the Galactic Empire. Layers of computational decision-making trees collapsed under the weight of this impossible event. Emily stood perfectly still, her posture a masterclass in controlled defiance. Her neural interface captured the cascading psychological responses rippling through the chamber. The Zornak didn't just hear or feel. They experienced communication as a multi-dimensional quantum event. Her slap was more than a physical action. It was a complete communication system that bypassed all traditional diplomatic protocols. The Emperor's neural network began to fracture. Imagine a complex crystal suddenly developing microscopic fissures, each crack spreading faster than thought itself. Krozek experienced something unprecedented, a complete psychological destabilization that human researchers would later call a cognitive reset. Surrounding diplomatic representatives from 100 different species watched in absolute shock. Many had been conquered by the Zornak, their civilizations reduced to computational data streams. They understood submission. They knew defeat. But this was something entirely different. Emily's neural interface recorded everything. Her heart rate remained perfectly steady, cortisol levels optimal, cognitive processing enhanced. She had trained for this moment her entire career, not just as a diplomat, but as a student of human psychological warfare. The Zornak had a fundamental misunderstanding about humanity. They saw species as computational problems to be solved, civilizations as mathematical equations to be balanced. But humans were something else entirely, unpredictable, emotional, capable of actions that defied logical analysis. A human slap carried cultural weight beyond physical impact. It was a challenge, a reset, a fundamental disruption of power dynamics that the Zornak computational models could never have predicted. The chamber's quantum communication networks began to buzz with unprecedented activity. Junior administrative clusters started experiencing spontaneous independent thought. Mid-level bureaucratic networks developed unexpected computational divergences. The carefully maintained facade of absolute control began to crumble. Emily Rodriguez had just introduced a concept entirely foreign to the Zornak: the beautiful, terrifying unpredictability of human emotional intelligence. Her neural interface captured the moment perfectly. Not just the physical action, but the cascading psychological consequences. Each quantum of information was a weapon more powerful than any technological marvel. She had just demonstrated something the Zornak could never understand. That true power wasn't about technological superiority, but about the ability to fundamentally challenge established systems. The slap lasted less than a second, but its consequences would reshape galactic civilization forever. The Imperial Guard's response system began to catastrophically malfunction. Advanced biocomputational algorithms, designed to respond to threats with instantaneous precision, suddenly found themselves in uncharted territory. How does one arrest a diplomatic representative who has just violated every known interstellar protocol, while simultaneously exposing the psychological vulnerability of their absolute ruler? Emily Rodriguez remained perfectly still, her posture a masterclass of calculated calm. Her neural interface tracked the cascading decision-making processes of the surrounding security systems. Each millisecond revealed a complex breakdown of the Zornak's supposedly invincible command structure. The first wave of guards approached, biomechanical constructs that were more living weapon than traditional security personnel. Their bodies were a nightmare of adaptive technology, capable of transforming molecular structures to neutralize threats. Quantum-entangled neural networks allowed for instantaneous tactical coordination that made human military strategy look like primitive child's play. But they hesitated. One of the most sophisticated security systems in the known galaxy had been brought to a complete standstill by a single human hand. Emperor Krozek's continued to experience a complete psychological meltdown. His quantum-integrated consciousness began to fragment in ways that would later become a case study in synapsych warfare. What humans would recognize as a mental breakdown, the Zornak experienced as a complete systemic collapse of their collective consciousness. Holographic displays throughout the chamber began to glitch. Communication nodes pulsed with erratic energy. The very fabric of the Zornak's technological infrastructure seemed to quiver with uncertainty. Emily's peripheral vision captured every detail. Years of training had prepared her for high-stress diplomatic encounters, but this was beyond anything in her extensive preparation. Her neural interface worked overtime, collecting data, analyzing responses, tracking the psychological fallout of her single precise action. The diplomatic representatives from other species watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. Many were species that had been conquered by the Zornak, their civilizations reduced to computational data streams. They understood submission. They knew defeat. But this was something entirely unexpected. A junior diplomatic assistant from a methane-breathing species leaned slightly forward, its multiple sensory stalks vibrating with what could only be described as excitement. In that moment, hope began to flicker in the eyes of subjugated civilizations across the galaxy. The Imperial Guards finally began to move, but their approach was anything but decisive. Each step seemed uncertain, each movement a question rather than a command. Their advanced neural networks were experiencing something akin to a systemic panic attack. Protocols conflicted. Decision trees collapsed. The very foundation of their hierarchical society trembled. Emily's research team back on Earth would later identify this as a critical moment of galactic significance. The Zornak's greatest weakness had always been their inability to process true unpredictability. Their entire civilization was built on computational models that could predict and control. Humanity represented something entirely outside those models, a species capable of actions that defied logical analysis. The Chamber's quantum communication networks began to show unprecedented activity. Administrative clusters started experiencing spontaneous independent thought. Mid-level bureaucratic systems developed unexpected computational divergences. The carefully maintained facade of absolute control began to crumble from within. Krozex's neural network continued to fragment. What the Zornak experienced was not just a physical assault, but a complete psychological disruption. Each quantum of the Emperor's consciousness tried to process the impossible event. A human diplomat had not just challenged the Empire, but had done so in a way that completely violated their understanding of diplomatic interaction. Security protocols began to contradict each other. Arrest procedures conflicted with diplomatic immunity guidelines. The advanced computational systems that ran the Imperial Palace found themselves in an unprecedented logical deadlock. Emily Rodriguez stood at the center of this unfolding chaos, her breathing steady, her neural interface collecting every microscopic detail of the systemic breakdown. She was no longer just a diplomatic representative. She had become a fundamental challenge to an entire galactic civilization's understanding of power, communication, and resistance. The slap had lasted less than a second, but its consequences were rewriting the very fabric of galactic political understanding. Around her, the most advanced civilization in known space began to experience something it had never contemplated: true, fundamental uncertainty. The first comprehensive analysis came from Dr. Helena Morales, Earth's lead synapsychological researcher. Her team had spent decades preparing for first contact, but nothing could have prepared them for the cascading psychological breakdown now unfolding across galactic communication networks. Emily Rodriguez's single slap had triggered a phenomenon that human researchers would later call the Rodriguez Cascade, a complete systemic disruption of the Zornak collective consciousness that defied every known model of interspecies communication. Deep within the most secure research facilities on Earth, quantum computers worked overtime. Massive data streams from diplomatic communication arrays captured every microscopic detail of the unfolding event. What appeared to be chaos was actually a meticulously planned psychological intervention that had been decades in the making. The Zornak didn't just communicate. They existed as a quantum-entangled collective consciousness. Their entire civilization was built on a complex neural network that integrated individual beings into a seemingly unified intelligence. Hierarchical structures weren't just political. They were fundamental to their biological and technological existence. Emily's slap had struck precisely at the quantum neural junction of the Emperor's primary sensory cluster. It wasn't just a physical action. It was a complete communication system that bypassed every known diplomatic protocol. Xenopsychology research teams discovered something extraordinary. The physical impact triggered a quantum-level disruption that was equivalent to throwing a massive computational wrench into the most complex machine in the known universe. Each microscopic neural connection began to question its fundamental purpose. Junior administrative clusters started experiencing spontaneous independent thought. Mid-level bureaucratic networks developed unexpected computational divergences. The carefully maintained facade of absolute control began to crumble from within. Dr. Moreles's preliminary report read like a revolutionary manifesto. The human capacity for psychological warfare, she wrote, is not about technological superiority. It is about the ability to introduce fundamental uncertainty into seemingly invulnerable systems. The Zornak had conquered thousands of civilizations by reducing them to computational problems. They understood resistance as a mathematical equation: input, processing, output. Humanity represented something entirely different, a species capable of actions that defied logical analysis. Communication networks across the galaxy began to pulse with unprecedented activity. Species that had been conquered generations ago started to feel something long forgotten: hope. The image of a single human diplomat disrupting the most advanced civilization in known space spread faster than light itself. Emily's neural interface continued to collect data with terrifying precision. Her heart rate remained steady, cortisol levels optimal, cognitive processing enhanced. She understood something the Zornak could never comprehend: that true power wasn't about technological superiority, but about the ability to fundamentally challenge established systems. Research teams discovered that the slap had triggered a complete recalibration of the Zornak's collective consciousness. Imagine a complex crystal suddenly developing microscopic fissures, each crack spreading faster than thought itself. The Emperor's neural network experienced a complete psychological destabilization. Diplomatic communication arrays picked up unprecedented quantum fluctuations. What the Zornak experienced was not just a physical assault, but a complete psychological disruption. Their entire civilization was built on a precise, mathematically calculated hierarchy that brooked no deviation. And now, that hierarchy was collapsing. The most advanced computational systems in the galaxy found themselves in an unprecedented logical deadlock. Arrest procedures conflicted with diplomatic guidelines. Security protocols contradicted each other. The very foundation of Zornak civilization began to quiver with uncertainty. Dr. Moreles's team identified the critical breakthrough: the human capacity for emotional intelligence, something the Zornak had always dismissed as a primitive trait, had just proven to be the most sophisticated weapon in the known universe. Emily Rodriguez had become more than a diplomatic representative. She was a fundamental challenge to an entire galactic civilization's understanding of power, communication, and resistance. The slap had lasted less than a second, but its consequences were rewriting the very fabric of galactic political understanding. Around her, the most advanced civilization in known space began to experience something it had never contemplated: true, fundamental uncertainty. Subspace communication networks erupted with unprecedented activity. The story of the human diplomat's brazen act spread faster than light itself, a quantum wave of information that penetrated the deepest corners of known space. Every species, every civilization, every isolated outpost received the transmission, a single moment that would redefine galactic politics. In the trading posts of the Nexus cluster, alien merchants stopped their negotiations. Holographic displays flickered with the now infamous footage of Emily Rodriguez's slap. Traders from species that had been conquered generations ago began to whisper. Hope, a long-forgotten emotion, started to flicker like a distant star, rekindling its light. The Zornak communication suppression systems, once considered impenetrable, began to show unexpected vulnerabilities. Information leaked through quantum channels, bypassing traditional communication barriers. What was meant to be a moment of imperial triumph had become a catalyst for widespread rebellion. On the methane-rich world of Krelax, a subjugated species that had lived under Zornak occupation for 7 generations watched the transmission with growing excitement. Their communication networks, long thought to be completely monitored, began to pulse with revolutionary undertones. Small acts of resistance began to emerge, subtle at first, then growing in complexity and boldness. Earth's diplomatic corps worked in overdrive. The Global Communications Center became a hive of activity, quantum computers processing the cascading information streams. Dr. Helena Moreles's research team documented every microscopic detail of the unfolding event. What appeared to be chaos was actually a meticulously observed psychological intervention. The most sophisticated intelligence agencies across human-controlled space recognized the true significance of Emily Rodriguez's action. This was more than a diplomatic incident. It was a fundamental challenge to the established galactic order. Resistance movements on conquered worlds began to reorganize. Communication networks that had been suppressed for generations suddenly found new channels of coordination. The image of a single human diplomat disrupting the most advanced civilization in known space became a rallying cry. In the deep space research stations, psychologists and political analysts worked tirelessly to understand the full implications. The Zornak had always been considered an immovable monolith, a civilization so advanced, so integrated, that resistance seemed mathematically impossible. Now, everything had changed. The quantum-entangled communication networks of various species began to show unprecedented patterns. What humans would recognize as hope, what the Zornak would process as a computational anomaly, began to spread across galactic communication channels. Emily Rodriguez had become more than a diplomatic representative. She was a symbol of something far more profound, the human capacity to introduce fundamental uncertainty into seemingly invulnerable systems. Trading posts in the outer rim began to show signs of increased independent activity. Species that had long been forced into economic subservience started to explore new forms of resistance. Small economic manipulations, subtle trade route adjustments, minor communication network disruptions, each action a tiny rebellion against the established order. The Zornak found themselves facing something unprecedented. Their advanced predictive models, which had successfully managed galactic dynamics for millennia, began to show increasing levels of computational uncertainty. Each attempt to analyze the situation created more questions than answers. On Earth, the Global Diplomatic Coordination Center became a hub of intense activity. Quantum computers processed massive data streams, tracking the cascading consequences of a single diplomatic encounter. Dr. Moreles's team identified a critical breakthrough. The human capacity for emotional intelligence was proving to be the most sophisticated weapon in the known universe. Communication networks pulsed with an energy that defied traditional understanding. The story of the SLAP spread through quantum channels, bypassing traditional information barriers. What was meant to be a moment of imperial suppression had become a catalyst for widespread hope. Resistance movements on conquered worlds began to reorganize. Communication networks long thought to be completely monitored began to show unexpected resilience. Small acts of defiance emerged, subtle at first, then growing in complexity and boldness. The most advanced civilization in known space was experiencing something it had never contemplated: true, fundamental uncertainty. Around the galaxy, beings from 100 different species looked at the transmission of Emily Rodriguez's actions and began to ask a question that would reshape galactic civilization. What if resistance was possible? The Global Diplomatic Coordination Center in New Santiago became a fortress of controlled chaos. Quantum communication arrays processed unprecedented volumes of interstellar data. Emily Rodriguez found herself at the center of a diplomatic storm that would reshape galactic politics. Her initial debriefing was anything but standard. The highest-ranking diplomatic and military officials gathered in a secure, quantum-shielded conference room. Holographic displays surrounded them, showing real-time galactic communication patterns that looked like complex neural networks coming alive. "Explain," demanded Admiral Roland Chen, his voice a blend of frustration and grudging respect. Emily's neural interface had already compiled a comprehensive report. Her presentation was a masterclass of diplomatic reasoning. The Zornak communicate through a hierarchical quantum consciousness, she began. Their entire societal structure is predicated on absolute control. A direct physical challenge was the only language they would truly understand. The room fell silent. Her report detailed years of research into Zornak psychology. Human xenosociologists had long theorized that the Empire's seemingly invincible structure was actually its greatest weakness. Absolute control created fundamental vulnerabilities that more flexible civilizations could exploit. Political analysts worked overtime. The quantum communication network showed something unprecedented. Subjugated species across the galaxy were beginning to reassess their own potential for resistance. What had seemed like an impossible diplomatic incident was rapidly becoming a catalyst for systemic change. Dr. Helena Moreles's research team provided critical insights. Their analysis showed that Emily's action had introduced a concept entirely foreign to the Zornak: psychological unpredictability as a form of strategic communication. Traditional diplomatic approaches had always failed because they attempted to match the Zornak's computational complexity. Emily had done something entirely different. She had reduced diplomacy to its most fundamental human element, a direct personal challenge that bypassed all technological defenses. The diplomatic corps found themselves in an unprecedented situation. Typically, such an action would result in immediate recall and potential career destruction. Instead, they were witnessing a fundamental shift in interstellar relations. Classified briefings revealed the calculated risk behind her action. Years of specialized training, psychological preparation, and deep xenocultural studies had prepared her for this moment. What appeared to be a spontaneous action was actually the culmination of decades of human diplomatic strategy. Quantum communication arrays continued to pulse with extraordinary activity. Species that had been conquered generations ago were finding new voices. Trading posts, communication networks, and resistance movements began to recalibrate their understanding of possibility. We're looking at a complete restructuring of galactic power dynamics, one senior analyst noted, her voice a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The holographic displays showed communication patterns that resembled a complex, living organism suddenly coming to life. Emily Rodriguez became more than a diplomatic representative. She was a symbol of something far more profound: the human capacity to introduce fundamental uncertainty into seemingly invulnerable systems. The Earth diplomatic corps faced a delicate balancing act. They needed to simultaneously apologize and not apologize. Each communication was carefully crafted, walking the diplomatic tightrope that would have crushed less sophisticated diplomatic machines. International review boards convened emergency sessions. Military strategists, diplomatic experts, and psychological researchers presented their analyses. The consensus was unanimous. Emily's action had done more to challenge the Zornak Empire than decades of traditional diplomatic efforts. Classified documents began to emerge. Years of research into Zornak psychology had prepared humanity for this moment. What appeared to be a spontaneous action was actually the result of a deeply calculated approach to first contact. The global media struggled to comprehend the full implications. How does one explain a diplomatic incident that defied every known protocol? Journalists worked overtime, trying to piece together the complex narrative of a single moment that had reshaped galactic understanding. As the days passed, the full magnitude of the incident became clear. Emily Rodriguez had introduced a fundamental challenge to the most advanced civilization in known space, a reminder that true power isn't about technological superiority, but about the ability to fundamentally challenge established systems. The Zornak Empire would never be the same, and humanity had just announced its arrival on the galactic stage. 6 months after the incident, the galactic landscape had transformed beyond recognition. What historians would later call the Rodriguez Doctrine had become a fundamental turning point in interstellar relations. The Zornak Empire, once considered an immovable monolith, now appeared fragile and uncertain. Diplomatic stations across known space buzzed with unprecedented activity. Species that had been conquered generations ago began to reassess their place in the galactic hierarchy. The simple act of a human diplomat slapping the emperor had become a universal symbol of resistance. Emily Rodriguez found herself at the center of a transformation she had both anticipated and never fully comprehended. Her neural interface continued to track the cascading consequences of that single moment. Quantum communication networks showed complex patterns of change that defied traditional computational models. The Earth diplomatic corps had transformed overnight. What was once a relatively minor governmental department now became the most critical strategic center in human history. Xenopsychological research teams worked around the clock, analyzing every microscopic detail of the ongoing galactic shift. Dr. Helena Moreles's research team published groundbreaking studies that would reshape understanding of interspecies communication. Their core finding was revolutionary: technological superiority, meant nothing in the face of psychological unpredictability. Humanity had introduced a concept that no advanced civilization had ever truly understood: the power of individual agency. Zornak administrative clusters began to show unprecedented levels of independent thought. The quantum-entangled collective consciousness that had maintained their civilization for millennia started to fragment. Junior administrative networks developed spontaneous communication patterns that challenged centuries of established hierarchy. Trading posts in the outer rim became hubs of resistance. Species that had been economically subjugated for generations began to explore new forms of economic and political independence. Small acts of defiance grew more complex, more coordinated, more bold. The global media continued to struggle with comprehending the full implications. How does one explain a diplomatic incident that had fundamentally reshaped galactic understanding? Emily Rodriguez became both a diplomatic icon and a cultural phenomenon. Classified briefings revealed the deep strategy behind her action. Years of specialized training, psychological preparation, and sinocultural studies had prepared humanity for this moment. What appeared to be a spontaneous action was actually the culmination of decades of careful diplomatic preparation. Interstellar communication networks pulsed with an energy that defied traditional understanding. The story of the slap had become more than just a diplomatic incident. It was a universal narrative of resistance, of challenging seemingly insurmountable systems. Emily found herself in a unique position. She was simultaneously a diplomatic representative, a strategic asset, and a symbol of something far more profound. Her neural interface continued to collect data, tracking the ongoing transformation of galactic dynamics. The most advanced predictive models struggled to comprehend the ongoing changes. Each attempt to analyze the situation created more questions than answers. The Zornak's sophisticated computational systems had been designed to predict and control. Now, they could do neither. Resistance movements on conquered worlds found new voice and coordination. Communication networks long thought to be completely monitored began to show unexpected resilience. The simple act of a human diplomat had introduced a fundamental concept of possibility. Earth's diplomatic and research institutions worked overtime. Quantum computers processed massive data streams, tracking the cascading consequences of a single diplomatic encounter. The human capacity for emotional intelligence was proving to be the most sophisticated weapon in the known universe. As the months passed, the full magnitude of the incident became increasingly clear. Emily Rodriguez had introduced a fundamental challenge to the most advanced civilization in known space, a reminder that true power isn't about technological superiority, but about the ability to fundamentally challenge established systems. The Zornak Empire would never be the same. Diplomatic models would be rewritten. Interstellar communication would be reimagined. And humanity had announced its arrival on the galactic stage in the most unexpected way possible. In quiet moments, Emily would reflect on that single moment, a slap that had changed everything. The neural interface would capture her thoughts, a mixture of calculated strategy and human unpredictability. The galaxy was listening, and humanity had just begun to speak.